listeners, I am Reverend Yue McCormick, Head Minister of En-Yuzan, Perfect Dragon Mountain, Shinganji, True Vow Temple, of the Nichiren Shu Sangha of the San Francisco Bay Area. This presentation is the third part of a three-part series on the life of Tiantai Zhiyi. The last 12 years of Zhiyi's life saw the establishment of the short-lived Sui dynasty and the unification of China. The Sui dynasty was established by Yang Jian, a general of the northern Zhou dynasty who usurped the throne from his grandson Emperor Jing of the northern Zhou. Yang Jian proclaimed himself Emperor Wen of the Sui dynasty and had the 8-year-old Jing and 59 other princes who could claim the throne of the northern Zhou put to death. Emperor Wen would rule until his death in 604. In 587, the Sui dynasty annexed the small state that was a holdover of the Liang dynasty. This was known as the Western Liang, and it had been a puppet state since 555 of the Western Wei, then the Northern Zhou, and finally the Sui dynasty. In 587, Emperor Wen had it taken over directly because he feared that it would ally itself with the Chen dynasty. Emperor Wen declared war against the Chen in 588, and by the spring of 589 his forces captured the Chen capital of Jiankang, thus uniting all of China for the first time since the fall of the Han dynasty in 220. Emperor Wen was succeeded by his second son, Prince Yang Guang, who became Emperor Yang. It was Prince Yang Guang who had led the Sui forces in their conquest of Chen China. According to most traditional historians, the prince had tried to rape one of his father's concubines, and feared that his father would remove him as crown prince in favor of his older brother, Prince Yang Yang. He therefore sent an associate to murder Emperor Wen and had Prince Yang Yang executed. There is no real evidence for this version of Emperor Wen's death, which appeared only after the establishment of the Tang dynasty. In any case, the historical consensus is that Emperor Yang went on to become one of the worst tyrants in Chinese history, whose wars and heavy taxation of the populace led to the swift fall of the Sui dynasty in 618. When Emperor Yang was overthrown by the rebel Li Yuan, his 13-year-old grandson was temporarily installed as the puppet Emperor Gong under Li Yuan's control. However, Li Yuan soon declared himself Emperor Gaozu of the Tang dynasty and had Emperor Gong put to death a year later in 619. As we review Zhiyi's life, we should always keep in mind that dynasties were rising and falling around him, that the threat of persecution and violence was never far off, and that the brutal character of the governors and warlords of his era gave Zhiyi good reason to keep his distance from them. In 585, after repeated requests by Chen Shubao, the last emperor of the Chen dynasty, and his son, Prince Chen Yuan, Zhiyi left Mount Tiantai for Guangzhe Temple in Jiankang, the capital of the Chen dynasty. Guangzhe, or Abiding Light Temple, had once been the residence of Emperor Wu, the first emperor of the Liang dynasty. That emperor had it converted into a temple, and it became a center for the study of the Lotus Sutra. At Guangzhe Temple, Guanding recorded Zhiyi's seminar on the Lotus Sutra. This would become one of Zhiyi's 3 major works, the words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra. In this work, Zhiyi divided the Lotus Sutra into the 3 parts of a sutra: introductory, main discourse, and dissemination portions, and also into the 2 halves of the trace gate and the original gate, each of which has 3 parts for a total of 6. Zhiyi also interpreted the words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra through 4 guidelines. 1. According to causes and conditions. 2. According to the 4 doctrinal teachings. 3. According to the trace gate and the original gate. And 4. According to contemplation of the mind. In 588, Zhiyi left Jiankang to return to his homeland, Jiangling, to avoid the invading forces of Emperor Wen of the Sui dynasty. Instead, he ended up staying at Mount Lu, just south of the Yangtze River. In 591, Prince Yang Guang, who later became the second emperor of the Sui dynasty, invited Zhiyi to Jingzhou. Presumably, the prince wished to see him because his father, Emperor Wen, was trying to restore Buddhism, and in order to ingratiate himself with a leading figure of the Chinese clergy in the newly conquered southern region of China. Zhiyi, ever wishing to keep his distance from political turmoil and intrigues, stayed in Jingzhou for only 4 months, from the end of the 11th month of 591 until the middle of the 3rd month of 592. While there, Zhiyi administered the Bodhisattva precepts to the prince and gave him a Dharma name. In return, Prince Guang bestowed the honorary name Zhizhe, or Wise One, upon Zhiyi. In March 592, Zhiyi returned from Yangzhou to Mount Lu. Later that year, he also visited Mount Nanyue to pay respects at the tomb of his late master Hui Se. At the end of the year, Zhiyi returned to Jingzhou and built a monastery, Yuquanxi Temple. While at Yuquan Temple, Zhiyi gave 2 lecture series that were recorded by Guanding. The first was the profound meaning of the Lotus Sutra, given in 593, and the second was the Great Calming and Contemplation, given the following year. These 2, along with the words and phrases of the Lotus Sutra, would become known as the 3 major works of the Tiantai school. The profound meaning of the Lotus Sutra analyzes the sutra in terms of the 5 categories of profound meaning of a sutra. The first is name, interpreting the title, in this case, Myoho Renge Kyo. The bulk of the profound meaning of the Lotus Sutra is an analysis of these 5 characters. 2. Entity, the ultimate truth taught in a sutra. In regard to the Lotus Sutra, it refers to the true reality that is the middle way of the perfect teaching. 3. Gist, it means the main import of a sutra. In regard to the Lotus Sutra, the gist is the cause and effect of Buddhahood in relation to the original Buddha's self-cultivation and attainment of Buddhahood in the remotest past. 4. Function, the benefit and power of a sutra. In regard to the Lotus Sutra, its function is supreme because it is based upon Shakyamuni Buddha's teaching according to one's own mind. That is the basis of the perfect teaching and can universally bring illumination and benefit to all sentient beings. And finally, 5. Teaching, where the sutra falls within the comparative classification of doctrines. Regarding the Lotus Sutra, its teaching is the supreme teaching according to the criteria of the 5 periods and 8 teachings. Let's look more closely at the 5 periods and 8 teachings that constitute the comparative classification of doctrines as explained by Zhiyi in the profound meaning of the Lotus Sutra. The 8 categories or teachings comprise the 4 methods of teaching and the 4 doctrinal teachings. The 4 methods of teaching are sudden, gradual, secret, and indeterminate. The sudden teaching is the flower garland's sudden presentation of the Buddha's own awakened perspective. The gradual teachings are the deer park, expanded, and prajna teachings, which gradually deepen the perspective of the listeners. The secret teaching is when disciples are secretly given teachings that only they are ready to understand. The indeterminate teachings are when the same teachings are given, but the listeners understand it in different ways, some in a more shallow way and some more profoundly. The 4 doctrinal teachings are the Tripitaka, which are the deer park teachings for voice hearers, the flower garland, expanded, and prajna teachings that are shared by the voice hearers and bodhisattvas, the flower garland, expanded, and prajna teachings that are distinctly for advanced bodhisattvas, and the perfect teaching of the one vehicle that is found in the Lotus Sutra and Nirvana Sutra. The 5 flavors are the flower garland teachings that combine the distinct and perfect teachings that are found in the sutra of that name, which are likened to milk, the deer park teachings that are solely the Tripitaka teachings concerning the 4 noble truths, which are likened to cream, the expanded teachings that contain and contrast all 4 doctrinal teachings, which introduce the Mahayana and are likened to curds, the perfection of wisdom are prajna teachings that include the shared, distinct, and perfect teachings and are likened to butter, and finally the teachings of the Lotus Sutra and Mahayana Nirvana Sutra, which are purely the perfect teachings, which are likened to ghee or clarified butter. The lecture series that became the Great Calming and Contemplation was given in the year 594. This work is focused on the practice of the sudden and perfect method of calming and contemplation. Of the many teachings covered in this work, the one that Nichiren Shonin highlighted was the teaching of the 3,000 realms in a single thought moment. The 3,000 realms consist of the 10 realms, which mutually possess the 10 realms, which all appear, disappear, and interrelate according to the 10 suchnesses that from Chapter 2 of the Lotus Sutra. And all of these manifest in terms of the 3 categories of existence, the 5 aggregates, sentient beings, and their environment. In 595, Zhiyi returned to Mount Tiantai and passed away there in 597. Guanding, also known as the Great Master Zhang'an, became his successor and the second patriarch of the Tiantai school. During Zhiyi's lifetime, half a dozen dynasties fell: the Eastern Wei, the Liang, the Western Wei, the Northern Qi, the Northern Zhou, and the Chen. He was orphaned due to the fighting that brought about the fall of the Liang dynasty, and was forced to flee an invading army when the Sui dynasty conquered the Chen. Though not directly affected, he also lived during the time of a major persecution of Buddhism in the territories ruled by the Northern Zhou. Zhiyi lived during one of the most turbulent periods of Chinese history. Life at that time, even for monks, must have been filled with uncertainty and stress. Despite all of that, Zhiyi was able to spend years in quiet contemplation in the mountains and in urban temples, lecturing on the Lotus Sutra and the practice of calming and contemplation. We owe a great debt of gratitude for his efforts, because they laid the groundwork for our own faith and practice in the Lotus Sutra, as understood, revised, and passed down to us by Nichiren Shonin and his successors. With that, I bring the last of this 3-part presentation of the life and teachings of Tiantai Zhiyi to a close. I hope that this presentation was helpful and informative and will help to enrich your faith in and practice of Nichiren Buddhism.